The Lying Man by Paige Gordon. Narrated by me, the author. If a man tells you he's a liar, should you believe him? Absolutely not. He just admitted he's a liar. But if he lied about being a liar, the reality is he must be an honest man. Yet, if he told the truth about being a liar, well, truth-telling is something only honest men do. So either that truth was his first step as an honest man, in which case you should believe what he said about being a liar, or he was lying when he said that, in which case see my previous point. So, if a man tells you he's a liar, what should you do? Now, dear reader, you understand my predicament. John Griffith Cheney told me he was a liar. I met John at an antique book fair. I know what you're thinking. Sexy, right? That's the kind of place every red-blooded young man longs to go on a free Saturday afternoon. I couldn't agree more. But I digress. The two of us were introduced by Jack London. Not physically, of course. He's been dead for over 100 years, but rather by a shared affection for one of Jack's most enduring novels, The Call of the Wild. I'd been dreaming of holding a first edition of that book for years, and today was finally my lucky day. After hours of browsing, posing the same question to a sea of different faces, I was torn from my stupor by the 10 words I'd been longing to hear. Old Buck? First edition? Yes, sir. I've got one right here. Gloved hands reached carefully into the glass cage separating the books from all the contaminants of the outside world, wrapped around a malted brown and forest green dust jacket, then gently deposited the tome on top of the glass. I stared in awe. There it was, my book. The one I knew would mark me as an actual collector. The one I knew I could never come back from. The one I knew I could never have. $28,500. With that amount of money, I could buy a new truck, or put a down payment on a starter home, or buy 5,700 Venti Cafe mochas from Starbucks. Or I could buy a book. One single book. Seriously? In reality, I wasn't going to do any of those things because, who the heck has $28,500 sitting around? And so I stared. I stared and dreamed. And then I met John. Have you read that one? The voice behind my right shoulder surprised me, and I barely suppressed the urge to jump. Yeah, I said, turning to find an elderly gentleman standing uncomfortably close. Sorry, am I in your way? No, take your time. I'm just browsing. Nothing particular. Most days I don't have any plan. I simply wander around waiting for the right one to call out to me. He smiled as he talked, and his eyes lit up with a devilish-looking mischievousness. Judging by his salt and pepper hair, heavy on the salt, the faded tweed jacket, complete with leather elbow patches, the stoop of his shoulders, and the slightly faded quality of his voice, I figured he was probably late 50s, maybe early 60s. A retired professor, perhaps. That would certainly explain the attire, and the fact that he was wandering around a place like this. Except, in truth, he was no longer wandering. He was just standing, perfectly still, with a Cheshire grin plastered across his face and a twinkle in his eyes. Despite his pleasant demeanor, I was acutely aware of his invasion of my personal space, and I couldn't help feeling like I was impeding his mysterious quest for the right one. So I quickly thanked the man behind the counter and turned to make my way back into the city of booths. Enough time spent dreaming over a book I'd never own. Enough time spent uncomfortably close to a strange old man. As I was absorbed into the river of humanity coursing through the aisles, I sensed a shuffling beside me and turned to find the professor keeping pace, a half step behind, his mischievous eyes locking instantly onto mine. I'm John Griffith Cheney, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to introduce yourself using your full name, as if it was very important for me to know his full name. Nice to meet you, I responded hesitantly. I'm Jack Kent. Before I knew it, John had guided us to the food court, ordered coffee, he insisted on paying, and sat down, staring intently as I shuffled awkwardly in my seat. So, you, come here often? Every chance I get, he replied. It takes a while to find what I'm looking for, but with enough patience, the right one always appears, and I make sure to take advantage of every opportunity I'm given. I nodded knowingly, as if that was something I did as well. It seemed more appropriate than confessing I come here all the time, see a bunch of right ones, and then leave dejected without purchasing anything. Being broke sucks. Before I could conjure up another question, he raised his coffee to his lips and prodded gently. So, tell me more about that book. The Call of the Wild? Surely you've read it. Considering his age and what I assumed was his profession, I couldn't imagine there were many books he hadn't read. Oh, of course I've read it. It's a favorite of mine. But I already know what I think about it. I want to hear your thoughts. Right. Well, where do I start? I racked my brain trying to piece together my journey with this beloved book. I read it for the first time when I was a kid, 9 or 10 maybe. I can't remember for sure, but I loved it. It scared the hell out of me, actually. I'd only ever been around family dogs, and I couldn't imagine anyone beating an animal like that, especially to the point of turning him into a killer. I remember having nightmares for a week after reading about Buck killing Spitz. Mom said I was too young for that book and tried to take it away, but I threw such a fit she finally gave it back. I laughed. It was scary and hard, but I just couldn't get enough of it. John smiled, nodded, and took another sip of coffee. I sucked down a gulp of my own while it was still hot. Cold coffee is for psychopaths. And continued. Then I just forgot about it for a bunch of years. Forgot about reading, actually. Something about growing older, having to pay bills, dealing with schoolwork, moving away from home. All of it was too much, and I ended up losing something I loved so much in my childhood. Later on, I realized I'd also lost my copy of that book from when I was a kid. His face fell into a knowing sort of frown. Happens to all of us at one point or another. We sat in silence for a moment. Obviously, though, you didn't stay in that place. No, thankfully not. I fell in love with reading again about a year ago and haven't been the same since. Crazy story, actually. I was cleaning out a bunch of junk from my closet, and when I went to throw a box away, the bottom fell out of it, and sitting there on top is my old book. He laughed as his eyes lit up even brighter than before. No. Yes, I kid you not. The bottom fell out, and off to the side of this pile of crap is my worn-out old paperback. Everything else in the box was complete junk, but somehow that little book managed to save itself from the dumpster. I sat back and laughed softly. It was crazy, man, just crazy. The Lord works in mysterious ways. He breathed the words like a prayer. That he does, I agreed. I didn't know what else to say. But after a moment, I started up again. But yeah, so I read it, and honestly, it changed my life. Reignited my love of reading, my desire for adventure, really gave me back my love of life in general. It seems ridiculous, but I feel like in a lot of ways that book saved me. I know I probably sound like a crazy person saying that out loud. On the contrary, I know exactly how you feel. His voice was soft and comforting. And that brings us to today. You making plans to purchase your own first edition? It is a beautiful thing to pay homage to a book that has done so much for you. Oh, absolutely, I replied seriously, and then forced out an insincere laugh. So, as soon as I've got an extra $28K laying around, I'll snatch it right up. Shouldn't take more than 7 or 8 decades to save up that much, at which point I'll be dead, he interjected. I was gonna say as old as you. I chuckled hesitantly. John Griffith Cheney kept on smiling. So what about you? I asked, realizing he wasn't going to be the one to break the silence. Your turn to talk now. I raised my, now lukewarm, coffee to my lips and waited. John shifted a little in his seat. Well, I usually don't tell strangers this. He lowered his voice and leaned in more than was strictly necessary, again with the uncomfortably close thing. But at this point, I'd grown somewhat accustomed to it, so I leaned in too. The truth is, I was a professor of literature for many years. Boom. Nailed it. However, I was recently relieved of my post and shown the door. Well, didn't nail that one. Oh, I'm sorry. What happened, if you don't mind me asking? Well, they found out I am a liar, and evidently that made them uncomfortable. He sat back and smiled, apparently waiting to see if that information also made me uncomfortable. It did. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I asked the only logical question I could think of. Well, Are you? A liar? Oh, most certainly, he replied cheerfully. And I'm an excellent one at that. At this point, any sane person would have said thank you for the coffee and politely excused themselves from the conversation. But oftentimes I do not act like a sane person. Oftentimes I spend my free Saturdays at antique book fairs. So, of course, I decided retreat was not an option. Well, what did you lie about? I asked, as nonchalantly as I could muster. My willingness to stay appeared to embolden and delight him. Leaning forward and dropping his voice to an even lower conspiratorial octave, he proceeded with his confession. I lied about being a book thief. His eyes shifted side to side, presumably to ensure no one else was listening to our conversation. Satisfied, he continued. Well, more specifically, I lied about not being a book thief. My brain spun for a moment, trying to make sense of the double negative. So you were a book thief? He shook his head. Correction, I am a book thief. Well, there's something you don't hear every day. But why? I asked, genuinely curious. If you were a professor of literature, didn't you have access to all the books you could ever want? Oh, yes. My position allowed me to read, borrow, and even own any book my heart desired. I have never been lacking in the book department. He chuckled as if we were both sharing an inside joke, only I was still on the outside. I don't get it, John. If you could buy or borrow any book you wanted, why would you ever resort to stealing them for yourself? Oh, no, not for myself. I never stole them for myself. He seemed genuinely shocked at the suggestion, which only served to make me genuinely confused. Huh? Jack, I would never even consider the idea of stealing a book for myself. I have no reason to. I only ever steal them to give them to others. He raised his coffee cup as if preparing to propose a toast to his own criminal self, and whispered proudly, I am the Robin Hood of book thieves. I steal from the rich and give to the poor. What the heck am I supposed to do with that? Okay. My brain felt like it was trudging through drying concrete. So the school found out you were a book thief, albeit one who steals for the good of others. Then they fired you because you lied about it. About not being a thief, that is. Because you actually were? I mean, are? Wait, are you still doing that? I whisper-shouted the last part, my anxiety ratcheting up at the realization I was drinking coffee with a self-proclaimed lying book thief in the middle of an antique book fair. John's smile was a mile wide as he leaned back in, his nose only inches from mine, and whispered, Oh, absolutely I am. My head spun as everything he'd previously said took on a different meaning. So, when you said you come here often and the perfect one jumps out at you, you didn't mean a book, did you? Twinkling eyes locked onto mine, and he couldn't suppress a small chuckle as he watched the pieces fall into place. You were looking for the perfect person. The perfect person to steal a book for. John Griffith Cheney sat back in his chair, folded his hands on top of the table, and smiled. And I found you, Jack. But you can't steal a book from me. I didn't ask you to. I was back to whisper shouting, hoping desperately that no one was paying enough attention to overhear this insane conversation. Well, that's hardly the point. Robin never gave to the poor because they asked him. He gave because they needed it. Because otherwise they would not have been able to eat. But I can eat, I stammered. I have a job. I earn money. I can buy all the food I need. John's face took on a patronizing, fatherly sort of look. Food for your stomach, yes, but food for your soul? Sometimes the food the soul desires costs much more than the average man will ever be able to afford. Like a $28,500 first edition? I could see in his eyes he knew what I was thinking. I see what that book means to you, Jack. It brought you back to life. It reignited a love for reading and adventure and life itself. If you don't have it, who will? Some collector. Someone who's never going to read it. Someone who will put it in a glass cage where it will live out the rest of its days unloved by anyone in the world. He shook his head sadly, his countenance dropping and his eyes seeming to fill ever so slightly with tears. Every book has a soul, Jack, and if the pages are never opened, that soul eventually suffocates and dies. I sat there, unspeaking, trying unsuccessfully to sort fact from fiction. Humans also have a soul, Jack, and if that soul is not fed by books, it too eventually suffocates and dies. That is why I do what I do. I give to the poor in order to feed their souls, in order to keep them alive. He's a liar, remember? He already told you that. Just believe him, and then this will all make perfect sense. Just believe him. So I did. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone and pretended to read something important. Oh man, I'm sorry, John. I just realized I'm late for a work meeting. On a Saturday? His smile cut through my lie with ease, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. Yeah, last minute thing. It was great getting to chat with you, though. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. John let out a sigh and politely requested that I help an old man out of his chair. The abrupt end of our conversation seemed to have drained the life out of him, and after helping him to his feet, I stood bracing him for several seconds while he regained his composure. Finally, he straightened and offered his hand. Thank you for your time, Jack. I appreciate you listening to an old man's stories. With that, he turned and quickly disappeared into the crowd. That was the last time I would ever see John Griffith Cheney. Relieved, I made my way to the parking lot and reached for the keys to my old Tacoma. As my hand fumbled in my pocket, a sickening realization hit me. I'd lost my wallet. I double and triple checked my pockets, opened the door to the truck, checked the console, the floor, the back seat. Nothing. Racking my brain through the strange events of the morning, I clearly remembered pulling my wallet out right before John had insisted he buy our coffee. Then it hit me. Helping John up, him leaning against me for an awkwardly long moment afterwards. I'm a liar, and an excellent one at that. I'd been had. I'd believed John Griffith Cheney was lying about being a benevolent book thief, but I hadn't believed he was lying about why he wanted to talk to me in the first place. It was never about me. It was never about the Call of the Wild. It was only about a score. I was just another mark for him. Well, the joke was on him. I was broke, remember? The next morning, I woke early and sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming beside me, contemplating the day to come, the nature of man, the complexity of a liar, and how much work it was going to be to get a new license, credit cards, library card, and whatever else I'd forgotten about in my wallet. In my stupor, I vaguely registered a shuffling sound outside, followed by a soft knock on my apartment door. Shaking my head clear, I made my way over and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Unlocking the door, I carefully opened it and glanced left and right. Nothing. Looking down, I noticed a package. Brown paper, brown string, unmarked. Roughly the size of a hardback book. At the table, my hands shook slightly as my fingers untied the twine and unfolded the butcher paper. Inside was my wallet, sitting on top of $28,500. Well, not $28,500 exactly. A book. A book that was worth $28,500. In between the two was a note. It read, "To my dear friend Jack, do not bother trying to find me. I obviously did not tell you my real name, and I am not a recently fired professor. I am a liar, remember? However, I did not lie to you about books. I would never lie about books, Jack. Books sustain our souls, as we sustain theirs by the love we give them. This book is my gift to you. Do not bother trying to return it. I won't take it back, and although the previous owner will, they will be forced to believe you were the one who stole it. Trust me, no one has yet been successful in convincing the police of the existence of a Robin Hood book thief, although several of my dear friends have tried before. So my advice to you is simply accept the gift. Love it well, read it often, and never forget the power books have to change your life. I wish you all the best, and hope we will meet again one day. Sincerely, John Griffith Cheney." I sat in utter silence long enough for the steam from my coffee to disappear as thoroughly as my elusive benefactor had. Finally, a reflexive sip from the ice-cold mug brought me back to reality, and I knew what I had to do. Pulling up my laptop, I opened Google and typed in a name I knew I would never forget. John Griffith Cheney. John Griffith Cheney, 1876 to 1916, better known as Jack London, was an American novelist. Sighing, I closed my computer. There was only one thing left for me to do. I buried my ice-cold coffee in the kitchen sink and refilled my mug. Taking up my seat at the kitchen table, I opened the worn molten brown and forest green cover and began to read. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed The Lying Man. This was a kind of passion project for me. I had the idea one day. I've never read short stories, and so I've been getting into reading short stories and wanted to try my hand at writing one. I just love the idea of trying to tell a complete story in a really succinct format. I think it comes from a lot of my songwriting experience of trying to tell a whole story in three verses and a bridge, right? And so I had this idea. I wanted to try it and got it and thought, you know what the heck? Like I have equipment. Like I'll just record an audiobook of this and I'll put it up here and people can listen to it if they want. So I hope you enjoyed it. It is on the Kindle store. I'm officially an author on there now. So that was fun. And yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. And I'll probably be putting some more up because honestly, I was having a ton of fun doing it. And yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye.